Hey y'all, it's your girl Zandra. I'm sitting in the yellow chair. I have on my happy pants. I grabbed my coffee milk and I'm ready to chat. Tonight, this episode is coming to you from Virginia. All right, y'all. So, for those of you that do not know, I typically sit in the yellow chair on Sunday nights and I chat with my coffee milk and my happy pants about a variety of topics. Now, some of those topics might include like my travels. I'll talk about going to concerts with my angels. I just pretty much talk about life. But tonight, I decided that I wanted to sit in the yellow chair and chat with you guys about this class that I'm taking at Liberty University. Now, my professor, Dr. Fighter, decided that she wanted us to do a presentation on different contemporary counseling theories. And I kept thinking, what could I do? Oh, I can sit in the yellow chair and talk to the people. So I decided that I would share with you guys my research that I found on dialectical behavioral therapy. Many people just call it DBT, and some people consider it talk therapy. So if you haven't already done so, go grab yourself some coffee milk, put on your happy pants, and chat with me, okay? So I hope y'all put on y'all happy pants and you grabbed your coffee milk because tonight this chat might be a little longer than what it usually is, right? Okay, so many of you might be wondering like, well, why did she choose to talk to us about dialectical behavior therapy or DBT? And I might refer to it as talk therapy as well. But when my professor gave us this assignment, I typically like to do research on topics that are going to be helpful for me as a school counselor and as a parent. And when I sit in the yellow chair, I want to talk about things that are going to be helpful for you all as well. So I thought about the challenges that my students face, and I thought about what would be a good topic to help me help them. All right, y'all. So as I completed my research, I found that dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, is not only beneficial for trained therapists to work with clients, but it can also be beneficial for school counselors, for teachers, for parents, and for students. So I thought, well, this is perfect because the challenges that some of my students face, I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. And I'm going to talk to you about some techniques that you can use with your students. Okay? All right, y'all. So, according to Harvard Health, DBT, or as we know it as talk therapy, is an evidence based therapy that teaches skills to manage intense emotions. It can help students improve relationships and cope with stress. And it gives us practical lessons that we can teach in the school setting, which is why I chose this particular therapy. DBT has also been proven to help clients deal with borderline personality disorder, self injury, suicide threats, and attempts. So, when I was completing research, I found that DBT is very adaptable. Like I said earlier, you can use it in the classrooms, counselors use it, parents and students can learn the different techniques and self regulate themselves. But the core of DBT is built on three big ideas: dialectics, behaviorism, and mindfulness. Dialectics is balancing the opposites like acceptance and changes, where behaviorism means that our actions are shaped by triggers and consequences. When we think about mindfulness, it is paying attention to the present moment. All right, y'all, I want you to ask yourself a question. Have you ever been in a situation where you were overwhelmed with your emotions and you wish you could just press the pause button? Think about that for a minute. Have you ever been in a situation where you were overwhelmed with your emotions and you wish you could just press the pause button? I know as a parent, a teacher before I was a school counselor, and as a school counselor, I've been in several situations where I felt like I just need a moment. I just want to pause because typically what happens is if we don't take that moment to pause, then we end up saying things out of anger or out of impulse that we then later regret, right? So, when we are emotionally spent, and that means that we're feeling drained or exhausted, or our emotions are just depleted, like we have nothing left to give, we often say things that we want to take back. And DBT will help students or clients, whoever it is that you're working with, pay attention to the present moment and not be triggered by someone else's actions. Well, Dr. Marshall Linehan is the founder of DBT, and she created techniques to help people respond mindfully to emotional situations. One of the techniques that she created was stop skill. Now, the letters in stop all mean something very different, right? So, stop. And that's easy for students to recognize and understand and remember. So the S in stop stands for just that, stop. Don't act impulsively, right? T is take a step back. We want you to just breathe for a minute, pause, and think about, observe, notice what is happening around you or inside of your body. So stop, take a step back, and observe. And then P is proceed mindfully. So after you've done all of those things, then you're able to choose a response to make sure that it's suitable for the situation that you're in. If you use the stop skill, then you won't blurt out something or say something out of anger that you then want to take back. All right, so can you see how those techniques that was developed by Dr. Marshall Linehan in DBT can be effective for school counselors, teachers, parents? You could even use that stop technique on yourself, right? And because it was so adaptable, I thought, like, this is the one that I need to talk about. All right, so let me ask you this question. Has anyone ever told you to just get over it? Like you're feeling some type of way, right? And you're trying to express how you're feeling. And maybe you've talked about it more than once, but eventually somebody is like, just get over it, right? When you're speaking about how you felt. Statements like these can often cause someone to feel invalidated, right? Have you all ever thought about that? Sometimes we're tired of hearing about something and we're like, you just need to get over it. Like, oh, that was so last year, right? But what you didn't know is when you tell people to just get over something that they're feeling, it can cause them to feel invalidated. And Dr. Marshall Linehan developed the self-validation technique as well. And she developed this technique to help the clients recognize and accept the feelings that they're having, even if someone else dismisses them, right? The essence, according to Dr. Linehan, is this feeling of invalidation that causes dysfunction in people. Because sometimes we wonder, like, well, why do people act that way? Or why do people self-harm? Or why do people have this particular disorder, right? Sometimes people have these dysfunctions when they grow up in environments where their feelings are often dismissed or invalidated. It can lead to deep emotional pain and difficulty regulating their emotions. I'm sure all of you know someone in that situation. Like if you just think about it for a minute, all of you know someone that has told someone to just get over it, or you know someone that has grown up in a environment where their feelings were dismissed, or they feel as if their feelings were dismissed, even if it was unintentional, right? Especially if you work with children, you've come across someone that has felt that way. But through its structured skills and strategies, DBT can be helpful with undoing the damage of these feelings and heal the people that are affected by them. All right? Are you in? Are you feeling why I thought it was necessary to talk to you guys about this? Okay, so as I continue to do my research, I found that Claudia Marino at Yale Medicine described the nature of DBT as a structured, skill-based, and collaborative therapy. And I think that's why they also call it talk therapy, right? Because you're collaborating and you're talking with the client. And in some cases, you bring the family into the sessions and you talk to the family about what you're working on with the client, right? Because you can't talk to a client about or students about undoing all of the hurt and the pain that they have endured without talking to the parents or the family about helping them through this particular season in their life, right? But anyway, DBT uses 4 key components to teach the skills needed to manage emotions, um, improve relationships, and to cope with stress. Now, mindfulness is used to focus on the present moment. Distress tolerance helps clients learn to cope with intense emotions in difficult situations. Emotional regulation helps clients understand and label their emotions. And interpersonal effectiveness helps clients develop skills to communicate assertively while maintaining self respect. So, some of you might be familiar with some of those techniques, but you didn't realize that it was a technique that Dr. Marshall Linehan developed under DBT. So we've talked about mindfulness, we've talked about the stop skill, we've talked about self-validation, distress tolerance is another one. I've mentioned emotional regulation and interpersonal effectiveness. So those are all skills or techniques that you can use when helping people deal with emotions. Based off of an article in Choice Point, to determine if DBT is appropriate or not, there are some assessments that you should do, right? So this is dealing with the assessments of DBT. Therapists access the 4 key components and use a combination of methods, including, so you can use a questionnaire, you can use interviews and records review to determine if this particular therapy is appropriate for your clients or not. During the treatment process, therapists also use daily diary cards and, behavioral chain analysis, right? During the treatment of DBT, therapists will sometimes use diary cards or daily diary cards and behavior chain analysis. Now, diary cards are structured tools that clients fill out daily to track their emotions. Sometimes they'll track their urges or their behaviors, and then they'll track the skill that they use to kind of help them through that moment. And that's called a daily diary card. The behavior chain analysis seems to be a great technique that when I was doing the research, I thought like I could use that technique when I'm working with students, because lately I've seen kind of like more and more students that have been involved in self-harming. And I thought that the behavior chain analysis could be a great technique to work with those students on, because it is a technique that carefully examines the problem of the behavior. So it then breaks down in sequence the linked events, right? So once we identify what the problematic behavior is, we can work to increase awareness of the triggers. So basically, kind of what happens is you're breaking down step by step what happened to cause the child to perform that behavior. And then you work with the child to find a replacement behavior. So if the student is cutting, then you want to work with the kid to figure out, well, what was those triggers? What caused you to react in that way? And then what could you do so that you don't harm yourself? Okay. Y'all, I also found it very interesting that I was using some of these techniques and I was calling it something different, or it was a similar technique, right? And you might find that you were in that situation as well. So when I was thinking about the fact that in a formal setting, the therapist has to be trained on dialectical behavior therapy or DBT. So I kept thinking, what is the counselor's role or the parent's role when they're informally working with DBT techniques? And I read this article that was called What to Expect from a DBT Therapist. And the author of that article explained that during the sessions, the counselor's role is to be the coach. And I guess like if you're the parent and you're using these different techniques, then your role would be the coach as well. That means that you're very direct and that you actively guide the client or the student, your child, right? You will intervene if you need to. And you're teaching the practical skills needed to help with emotional regulation and acknowledging the client's feelings. Remember, because sometimes the client feels some kind of way because their feelings have been dismissed. So you need to make sure that you're acknowledging their feelings and then you're giving them skills to help them with whatever it is that they're feeling. It's also important for the counselor to hold the client responsible for their actions. And sometimes counselors just kind of listen, and parents don't want to make the situation worse, or they don't want to fight that battle. But it is very important for you to hold them responsible for their actions or accountable. And the counselor must also collaborate and model the skills needed for the client to be successful. So that is the counselor's role or the parent's role, right? Well, the client or the student has a role too, and their role is to participate. They need to be honest about their emotions and they need to be willing to engage in the activity, because you might do some role playing with them and then they might be looking at you like, I don't want to do that. So they need to be willing to engage in the activity. If they're not willing to engage, then you're just kind of wasting time. Another important thing that the student or the client must be willing to do is change. And change is hard, like for a lot of people. So if they're not willing to change, or if they're stuck on doing whatever it is that they do, then you might be out of luck. Or you might need to find another therapy or theory, right? All right, y'all. So one of the downfalls of DBT is the time commitment, and it can be a bit overwhelming. So when you're thinking about even the behavior chain analysis, when you're helping a student or a client try to figure out, well, what happened, what was the trigger, what made them self-harm, or whatever the case might be, you have to then break down everything that took place. You're having them relive the scenario or the situation that caused them to harm themselves. And that can be a lot. And sometimes clients or students don't want to relive everything that happened, right? They want to just move past it, not talk about it. So you have to find a creative way to keep their attention. Sometimes people get bored and they lose interest in DBT. But for those that do stick around for it, the standard time for a formal program that's with a trained therapist is 6 months to a year. And weekly skills group sessions that can last about 2 hours each time, right? Because you're going over skills and techniques that are going to help them be successful. So, for the big question that you all have been waiting for, dun, 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 how does this theory lend itself to Christian worldview? Well, you know, I told you guys that I was enrolled at Liberty University. And for all of our classes, we have to incorporate a biblical worldview. So if you're wondering, like, well, how does this relate to a Christian worldview? DBT was originally developed as a secular, evidence-based treatment, but many of its principles lend itself to Christian values or Christian worldview because it emphasizes acceptance, compassion, and intentional living. For example, when teaching the techniques of mindfulness, you could include prayer in your mindfulness, right? When you're asking the person to be present in the moment, you can incorporate prayer into that. And a great example of this was in a video that I watched that was uploaded in our class assignments. The therapist in the video was doing a mindfulness session with a client, and they incorporated a biblical worldview. They incorporated prayer in mindfulness. They ended with amen. Like, it was just really good to see how it would be incorporated, because at Liberty University, we have to always incorporate a biblical worldview. In Psalms 46:10, Christians often practice mindfulness through prayer, meditation, and scripture. And a lot of times they focus on being still and being present with God. And when we're being mindful, that's exactly what we're doing, right? We're thinking about the here and now and how we're feeling. And then we're thinking about God, right? Most of the techniques I discussed in this chat aligns with the teachings of God. Self-validation aligns with Christianity teachings that humans are created in God's image, right? And interpersonal effectiveness goes hand in hand with loving thy neighbor. So although DBT doesn't reference God or scriptures, Christians can integrate dialectical behavior therapy skills into their faith. All right, so I don't even know how long this video is, y'all. Like, typically my chats are like 10 to 15 minutes. Sometimes I go over, sometimes they're like 30 minutes. But I know that I've covered a lot of material in this chat. But I want you to really like think about how you can apply the DBT techniques that we've discussed to situations that you might encounter, whether you're dealing with your own personal family or if you're dealing with students or clients that you work with. But there are so many more techniques that I didn't even discuss. But I did talk a lot about mindfulness exercises. One that I didn't discuss at all is opposite action and interpersonal scripts. So let me encourage you to view. So basically, like what you can do is search. You can view self-help websites like DBT, self-help, and positivepsychology.com for more resources. You can also search for and get the foundational text by Dr. Linehan for a full description of dialectical behavior therapy. I would also like to encourage you to dive deeper into how DBT lends itself to Christian worldview. And finally, what I want you to think about is the fact that DBT or dialectical behavior therapy or talk therapy can truly empower students or clients, right? It can empower them to be resilient and have confidence. And move out of this crisis situation that they find themselves in and walk in confidence so that they are truly living a life that is worth living, right? But before I end this chat, I would like to share a case study with you guys, right? So this study will show how DBT can help students recognize the emotion triggers, thoughts, and situations that lead to self-harm. And I've talked a little bit about this during the chat. So using DBT will not stop the behavior immediately, right? But the hope is that over time, it will help the student to understand their emotions, to manage their emotions, and to replace the behavior with a healthier coping strategy. And I hope that you will reflect back on some of the strategies that I talked about. So I have a student named Annalise Keaton. Do you know that student? Maybe you've seen that show before. If you know, then you know. Okay, so Annalise Keaton is a high school student. She's 16 years old and she grew up in a house where her emotions were often dismissed. She cried a lot and her family would constantly tell her to stop crying and that whatever she was dealing with was not that big of a deal. Like, girl, get over it. So Annalise had an interpersonal conflict. She had academic stressors and she had feelings of rejection. So from an early age, she felt dismissed and invalidated. So guess what Annalise started doing? She started self-harming herself, right? She started cutting. And it provided her with a temporary relief from emotional intensity. But then she would feel guilty about it for hurting herself. Well, she would go back and forth. Sometimes she would feel like she deserves to be punished, and then she would feel guilty about punishing herself. And then she would hide it from everyone, right? Because then she was embarrassed by it. So to help Annalise at school, the counselor used daily diary cards so that she could track her urges to self-harm and she could also track her emotions. If she was sad or if she was shame for harming herself, she can track that. Annalise could also track the skills she used to help herself with the emotions. The counselor also used a behavioral chain analysis to help Annalise map out her recent episode, right? So the counselor would talk to her about what were the triggers that led to her self-harming herself. And then through that particular technique, they were able to figure out what prompted the event, which was an argument with her sister. So Annalise shared a room with her sister, and she had been staying up late. The sister had been staying up late talking on the phone, which in turn kept Annalise up late at night. So Annalise was sleepy when she went to school, and she was hungry because she would oversleep and she wouldn't get breakfast. And so she was just kind of in a mood, right? Because she wanted to be on time for school. So she started coming to the guidance office for snacks in the morning, and she kept saying like, well, I didn't eat breakfast and that kind of thing, right? Which was kind of off. But when she complained to her parents about the sister, her parents kind of turned the table on her and was like, well, why wouldn't you sleep anyway? Or they told her it wasn't that big of a deal. Like she would be okay because the sister wasn't on the phone often and that kind of thing. Well, Annalise remembered that her parents always seemed to take her sister's side in situations like these. So to relieve that hurt that she was feeling and the pain that this was bringing up for her, Annalise started to self-harm. The counselor helped Annalise start replacing the behavior with a self-soothing technique, like listening to music and some grounding exercises, right? So then they would look at things like, okay, think about 5 things, your senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What can you taste? What can you touch? Being present in the moment, which goes back to being mindful. In addition to using other techniques, over several months, Annalise reduced her self-harm episodes significantly, right? So then the counselor recommended that the family see a therapist, right? And eventually they did and worked through some of those. They worked through learning validation strategies so that they could support Annalise. Because sometimes parents even like say things or do things or react a certain way and they don't realize the damage that it's causing. All they do is like, well, why are you doing that? And, sometimes they go in and they don't realize like, okay, so maybe we as a family need some help. And so that's what happened. So Annalise began to replace her cutting strategies and her self-harm with a healthier technique. So this was a long chat, but I hope that you found it very meaningful and helpful to you. If not, I hope you will tune in to next week for the next chat. You never know what I might be chatting about. All right, y'all, I hope you have enjoyed chatting with me about dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, or talk therapy, and I'll chat with you soon.